Hello, and welcome to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group Biweekly Sync. It is August 13th, 2020. Stepping into our agenda, we got a great call for you today. Latest updates on SharePoint Framework, updates across the patterns and practices, program offerings, new community samples, and then we got demos from David, Ramin, and Hugo. So SPFx optimizing with bundles, and calling dynamics APIs from SharePoint, and also the photo ID web part. Very excited to see all of those, especially mixing in the cognitive services. It's going to be some very neat demos today, as always. Before we get too far into the call, I always like to mention opportunities to participate in the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group. Encourage you to demo any and all of the great work you're doing for your customers and your companies. Those could be SharePoint Framework stuff, web parts, application customizers, provisioning, anything else you create, client-side scripting related, and then, of course, anything involving any of the @PnP offerings. That could be PnPjs, the CLI, reusable controls, the Yeoman controls, any of those things or all of those things together in a demo, I think can be really interesting. We've seen some great demos, so I encourage any and all of you who might be interested in presenting on this call or any of our other community calls, please reach out to myself or Vesa, and we will get you booked. I always do like to say it might not be the very next call we can get you booked on. Sometimes we're booked out a little bit, but we will get you booked. We would love to host your demo and have you on the call, so please just let us know, and we will get you a spot. The last two ways, or the other two ways to contribute or get involved, is to contribute on GitHub. And that could take a couple of forms: reporting issues, submitting pull requests, or helping others with issues and questions they might have. So if you see a question in the list and you might happen to know the answer for whatever reason, jump in and answer that question. It'll really help those folks get going and make them get it, or let them get an answer a little bit faster than maybe just waiting for somebody from the core team or one of the core maintainers to respond to that. So everybody helping everybody is how we all get better. And then finally, you can provide feedback. So how are these calls? What are, what documentation can we do better? A lot of the times we get comments about, your documentation should be better. And I do not disagree with that, but it really helps us if you have concrete suggestions that we could sort of say, okay, this page, and focus on something, because the all-up documentation should be better is just kind of, we can't really solve that as a thing. So if you have specific feedback around documentation, love to get that, love to get those things updated. Where else can we help? And of course, positive feedback is okay too. So there's something that we're doing that you really like, I would love to hear that, so maybe we could do a little bit more of it, or bring that a little bit more prominent into the phone calls. And our page links. So dev YouTube, or the developer videos YouTube link there, M365 dev YouTube will get you all the developer oriented videos. M365 PnP videos get you the community videos. So that would be things like recording of this call, our other community calls, things like that, as well as some more general sessions and stuff like that. There's a great mix of stuff there. So awesome place to catch up on what's going on in the community. Open source, we've got a whole set of organizations now. GitHub.com/SharePoint/PnP/Office Dev and /Microsoft Graph. All four of those are open to various levels of feedback and pull request submissions and working together. So I know the SharePoint one is more about the issues list. That's not as much open source, but PnP, Office Dev, and Microsoft Graph, as far as I know, are all open to contribution and looking for folks that are interested in getting involved. I know the Graph folks are doing a lot of work to sort of open things up to contributors, and they'd really like to get some more contributors involved. So if you've got interest and putting some energy in over there, that I believe would be absolutely welcome by that team. Definitely check that out. Sample galleries, so lots of samples, so web parts, extensions, list formatting, and then we've got team samples now as well. Certainly check those out, and those samples use a host of different technologies under the hood. So you've got React stuff, Angular stuff, Graph stuff, CLI samples, that are involved with CLI. So all kinds of great ways to see how these things work and what different capabilities you can bring into your projects. See how others have solved maybe problems you're having today. And then finally, the all-up link to everything PnP, aka ms/m365 PnP. If you can only remember one link or only want to write down one link, that is the one that'll get you to all of these other resources from that landing page. And then as well, stuck down here at the bottom, the SharePoint Framework documentation, aka.ms/SPFx, will take you to the SharePoint Framework developer documentation, which is also you can find in the same similar area the rest of the SharePoint developer documentation around the same spot. So stepping in now, so this is the Sharing is Caring program. So if you're not familiar with this or haven't attended any of these sessions, we've got first-time contributor sessions coming up on August 21st, 24th, and 26th, and then community docs sessions August 28th and 31st, with 2 sessions on the 31st. So these are free sessions to help you if you've never contributed to open source before. You're maybe looking for a little bit of guidance. How do I submit a pull request? What's an appropriate pull request? Things like that. These are fantastic free sessions put on by David Warner, typically, and Hugo, I believe, helps out with these as well, and maybe a couple other folks. Don't mean to forget anybody, but these are free sessions. Great place to come and get a little bit of guidance on getting started with contributing to open source generally and PnP a little bit more specifically. But these are all skills you'll be able to take and contribute to really any project in GitHub. aka.ms/sharing-is-caring is the registration link, and as well more information there for folks that are interested. And these are great sessions. Encourage you to check those out as a way to get started contributing. And in terms of training, we have a free virtual conference coming up on the 1st of September. And that's the PnP Virtual Conference. So aka.ms/PnP Virtual Conference for the community, by the community. That's pretty much put on entirely by MVPs and others from the community. Really excited to see that happen. A great free conference. Lots of fantastic sessions. You can see the agenda for all the different sessions there at the link aka.ms PnP Virtual Conference. So certainly encourage folks to check that out. A great kickoff to what is going to be, I think, a large virtual conference season over the next 6 to 12 months. Now, SharePoint Framework updates from Vesa.
Yeah, so nothing really super dramatically new stuff from our side, from the engineering side. Obviously, just a reminder, SharePoint Framework 1.11 is out, and as part of this announcement, we also enabled SharePoint Framework in the store. So we're really welcoming SharePoint Framework solutions and application web parts and extensions in the app source and in the SharePoint store. And what it means basically is that you don't need to really decide, are you going to put your solution to the app source or a SharePoint store or whatever. It's actually both. So you're able to offer your offerings inside there. You can have a licensing model in those solutions as well. The web parts or extensions could be dependent on another applications or SaaS services. All of that is available as well. And we obviously also support SharePoint Framework for Microsoft Teams through this channel as well. And we're looking into making that better and better in the future. Now, the next slide is more on just a reminder and credits for our partners who were part of the preview program. So most of these partners already have a solution available in the store. Some of them are still finalizing or doing adjustments on their solution, and they will be available in the store relatively fast. So thank you, Lightning Tools, Hyperfish, SharePoint, Alest Office at Work, and Raincore for making sure that our validation process and the store's publishing process is in place and it works properly for our partners. Making sure that everybody know how to get their stuff in the store as well. We obviously have guidance on publishing SharePoint Framework solutions to the store. So if you go to the AKMS SPFx, where you find how to get started, tutorials, all of that stuff in SharePoint Framework, you'll also find in the main navigation nodes a location related on publishing your SharePoint Framework solution to the store, where we talk about the validation process, the policies, the rules, and all of that. So one location where you can find all of the sufficient guidance for that. And then related on the Microsoft Teams and SharePoint Framework, obviously in the stores, not necessarily through the store, but obviously we have now updated section related on Microsoft Teams targeted SharePoint Framework solutions, because any SharePoint Framework web part can be exposed in the Microsoft Teams as well as a Microsoft Teams solution. So one code base, with automatic hosting, super simple way of doing permissions and management and all of that stuff is available for Microsoft Teams extensibility as well. So we have a section where we talk about the options and how to get started and all of that. So really cool stuff as well. And then the final slide on my side. Just a recap from Tuesday as well. So what are we looking into doing? So SharePoint Framework 1.12 is already in the works, where we concentrate really on the Teams integration. And we're looking into having also better Microsoft Graph APIs in general for SharePoint side, more branding settings, better Microsoft Teams embedded support, which means that you can embed your portals in the Microsoft Teams, and that's getting actually in a really nice stage, and that's going to be definitely demonstrated in the upcoming Ignite conference as well. SharePoint Framework Store improvements. We are live now with the store, but it's still here and there. It's a classic experience, so we're modernizing that relatively soon as well. So it's getting a lot of love from the engineering perspective, and then numerous other things as well. But I think that's it from my side. So we're saving some time for the other ones as well. And if there's any questions, I'll follow up on the chat.
All right. Quick updates through the PnP offerings so we can get to the demo. So PnP client-side libraries, PnPjs 2.0.8 released on August 7th. That's last Friday. Added some capabilities around extending a custom SP HTTP client. Not something I think anybody would ever really need to do, but we added that capability. There was one user had a need that the library needed a little help there. Base URL for Graph, that helps with government GCC clouds, clouds that use a different URL than graph.microsoft.com. So that's a capability added now. Lots of documentation updates and got some issues fixed as well. We got the 2.0.9 release scheduled for September 4th. We're back on our monthly cadence as before. Thank you to everybody that contributed for the 2.8 release and all the rest of the releases. Appreciated, and look forward to working with more contributors as we move forward. Great video series, PnPjs videos, understanding extension methods has been released. Hopefully we'll have some more to come on that video series soon. Help us socialize the M365 PnPjs Twitter account. And then just a final reminder, do please all feedback to the issues list. That just helps us track it. If we get stuff in Twitter or Teams or any of the other dozen channels, sometimes it just gets lost, and that's not on purpose or not because we don't care. But putting stuff in the issues list means it can be tracked and we're not going to lose it, and we have one spot to look for all that feedback. So very much appreciate all the feedback, but please do direct it to the issues list to ensure that we don't miss it or forget about it or something like that. pnp.github.io/pnpjs for the docs, at M365 PnPjs on Twitter, and encourage everybody to check out PnPjs if you haven't already. PnP Office 365 CLI. PnP Office 365 CLI, no big updates. We got the new beta version 2.14 is out with uninstalling Teams apps and then listing site groups. Have you tried the SPFx doctor command yet? Let them know. And you can always install the latest beta npm install-g at pnp/office365-cli at next. More information, aka.mso365cli. If you're not familiar with the CLI, it's a great command line tool to help you manage and deploy your SharePoint either development environment or production environment or anything. They have graph commands in there. There's stuff for managing teams, all sorts of stuff. Great resource, great thing to have in your tool belt as a developer. So certainly check that out. And you can, of course, try out the V3 preview. That is a mostly new code base, I believe is correct. So there's some docs on that as well. There's a github.com PnP Office 365-CLI discussions, and then Office 365 CLI on Twitter. So check out the CLI as well. Reusable components. So reusable controls, no big updates this week, but just a reminder, these are out there and a great resource for folks building React projects. They have put a ton of work into getting the V2 betas out there. So supporting React 16, support for the Fluent UI, SharePoint Online only is a limitation for these because of the React 16 version. I believe that's why, and some other reasons perhaps. But definitely check these out. This is a great way to drop functionality into your projects, get a great out-of-the-box look, and certainly an opportunity for folks looking to contribute. The reusable controls are a really great way to do that because each control is a fairly isolated container, so to speak. So you could create a control and submit it here, or you could update an existing control and submit those fixes without having to, impact, for perhaps a much larger area. So a great way to get involved. Encourage you to check out the reusable controls for your projects. I feel like I'm telling folks to check things out a lot today, but the reusable controls folks are absolutely looking for your feedback, especially around the V2 beta. So if you have some time to install these, test the V2 beta. They would love to hear about any issues you're having or ideas you have to help make those things better. The PnP Community Yeoman Generator, no updates this week, but want to remind folks the PnP generator is out there and is a great way to jumpstart your projects. So you have under the hood the SharePoint out-of-the-box, SharePoint Framework out-of-the-box generator, but with a few more options. So you could create different kinds of projects, Angular, you can include different things like PnPjs or the PnP controls just as part of the Yeoman setup experience. So they are also looking for some help on reworking some stuff. Another great place to contribute and get involved if you're interested in Yeoman and working to make a Yeoman generator or create a Yeoman generator, work on making it better. If you're interested in learning more about that process and what's gone into that already, certainly an excellent opportunity to get involved and contribute there. And then moving on to the modern search, aka.ms/PnP-search. So this is all about building modern search experience with flexible web parts. So it's a set of web parts you can compose together on a page to get a rich search experience. So the 3.14.2 is still the latest release. We're only for the 3.x branches. We're not looking for PRs for new features right now, only bug fixes. And there's work going on behind the scenes for what the V4 is going to look like. I don't have any dates or details around that at this point, but that is all coming. So certainly check out the modern search. It's again, a great drop-in solution, build a rich experience composing those web parts together and allow you to build a great search center for your users. And then I think Hugo.
Thank you. So we have a few new samples over the last 2 weeks. First of all, we don't have any new extension samples. I was crying before this call, but I'm sure that people are going to be submitting new samples for SPFx extensions. On the SPFx web parts, on the other hand, we do have some changes. Peter Paul Kirchner fixed a little bug with the managed metadata with the modern charts. Modern charts were originally created by Jeremy Coleman, but Peter Paul Kirchner made some updates for us. We have the new People's Search web part by Yannick Riekmans that allows you to actually do custom search using Graph. We have João Mendes, who updated created the React My Sites, which lists my sites. And we have a web part that I'll be demoing today, which is a smart profile photo editor, which will use Azure Cognitive Services to make sure that whatever pictures people are submitting for their profile picture are actually kosher. And in the domain of editing profile pictures, we have a new avatar editor by Kunj Sangani, which allows you to build an avatar. It's very fun to use. I created many avatars for me. But that's all we have for samples. We welcome samples, and we always mark issues as help wanted. So we encourage you to help answer questions or contribute samples. That's it for me. Back to you, Patrick.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hugo. And now I believe our next slide is demos. So David, you are up first with something around SPFx optimizing bundles. What's all that about, David?
Let's find out together.
Take it away.
All right, excellent. So for those that are new in the community, this is my contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out to me if you'd like to collaborate on anything. Today, we are going to talk about the SPFx optimized package bundling and controlling the JavaScript chunk names that come with that. So what we're going to cover is what is a JavaScript chunk. And for those that are not familiar, perhaps with the overview of the basic package bundling, we'll have an overview on that. And then we're going to have a demo of how you can customize those chunk names, and then we'll talk about the benefits. All right, so what is a JavaScript chunk? Now, if you're old like I am and a fan of the Goonies, you may be thinking of Captain Chunk from Goonies, right? But that is not. We love chunk there, but we love even more JavaScript chunks. JavaScript chunks are the JavaScript that's output from your SPFx control, whether it's an extension or a web part. And so when you generate them, you get a JavaScript or one or more JavaScript files that will run, obviously, your web parts. So the default package bundling you can see here on the screen is when you include and import things such as something like we'll see in the demo, such as jQuery or Moment, both very basic libraries. And there are better libraries that we're going to use or can use, but we're going to go ahead and demo those because they're familiar for everyone, whether you're new or you've been in the community and developing for a long time. But what happens is all of that functionality gets bundled into a single JavaScript file. So even if it's not executed or needed on page load, for example, you may not need the libraries until you click a button, that functionality is still included on the page load. So that payload is a little heavier, and you may pay for that right away, even though you don't need to. Optimized dynamic package bundling allows you to split that functionality into multiple JavaScript files. So as we see here, this is an example of importing a jQuery, but in our case, for this particular sample, we don't need jQuery until it's actually called upon by a button click. So we can see that it's converted out to a separate file, and now that 100K original file payload on page load is now only 14 kilobytes. So we can see that the load of the original file is smaller, so we're going to have a better execution and load time, and it reduces that initial load of the solution. I've done a video, you can see that there at the URL if you'd like. So let's look at a demo. We'll examine the default package chunk names, what happens. Now we'll modify them as well to be asynchronously imported. So if you're not familiar with asynchronously, it just simply means that we want it to go call in those libraries at a time later on demand while other things on our solution are processing. So essentially we want it to occur in the background kind of when we click that button. And then we're going to see how we can combine multiple async imports into a single chunk bundle. All right, so let's dive in. So here, let me set the context for what you see on your screen. I've got an out-of-the-box web part here on the left in VS Code. My command prompt to that exact demo web part on the right, and we're looking at the actual distribution files of our JavaScript chunks. Now, what we're looking at in this case is a pre-bundled version of if we had simply done this. If we just simply imported Moment or jQuery and then used it, and we can see I'm using it here when we click a button, load async bundles, and we're just simply executing on Moment and using jQuery to do a very simple content injection, right? But what happens is we get this initial payload on the load of the page that we don't need. We don't need jQuery and Moment at that time. So we're going to close this. This is just a glimpse. We're going to open the real file, and we're going to see what we're doing here with optimized package bundling. We're able to actually dynamically and on demand pull in our libraries. Now, I've put them into a separate file here for jQuery and Moment, and you don't have to do that, right? I do that because I like the I like the organization of it, the separation. I can add additional functional methods here if I need to, do more than just simply import and return jQuery, but it's functional for me, and that's kind of how I like it. So we're able to call them in on demand. So what does that look like, though, when I bundle it? So let me just delete these so we don't get multiple bundles, and we're going to go ahead and execute a gulp bundle ship based on our values that are saved right here. Now, in that webpacks, what we're going to see is something similar to what we saw in the slides. We're going to see that all of our bundles are now chunked out into separate files. Our original payload right here is down to only 15K. And then just because we know jQuery is bigger than that, it's 87K, but Moment is huge, very big library is 259K. But if you look at the names of these files, well, it's a little confusing, right? It adds somewhat of a GUID to them and just prefaces them with a name. So if you were doing debugging, if you were doing telemetry checking and reporting, you wouldn't really know which is which. It'd be hard to know. There's a better way. We can use what's called Webpack chunk names to identify exactly what these files are by their file name. So what I'm going to do in our await import right here is I'm going to go ahead and paste in a very simple, what looks like a comment. This is used by Webpack, but it's actually an instruction, and it's saying instead of just giving this a default name, I want you to give this Webpack chunk name something that includes import jQuery. So now we'll go ahead and do that as well on our moment. We'll save that and we'll rebundle. Let's delete our files and see what the result is. What the result will be, I can give you a preview, is it will include the name that we just gave it, right? So we're going to see when it's finished packing and bundling right there. We now see our files have our specific names in them. We know that this is moment, right? Because of the size, and we see that by the name. The same with jQuery and 87K. Pretty cool. This helps with telemetry. It helps with debugging. We know what's loaded. You see these other ones here because those are simply the additional files, the TypeScript files that do actually the importation. So don't need to worry too much about those. But these are the primary things, right? Now you may be saying, well, hold on a second. What if I'm only using those together? In this case, I am only using moment and jQuery together for my particular use case. So I don't necessarily want them to always be two separate files. Is there any way that we can have them optimized, bundled, right, so that they can be pulled in asynchronously, but also be in the same name, meaning the same file? Yes. So all we do, again, very simple change, is we change our chunk name to the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and just change that name here to import jQuery and moment. Now I'm going to do that for both of them. So they both now are referencing the same name. Let's delete our bundles and rerun the gulp bundle. And when this is done, what we'll see is a combined chunk file for us that uses the same name. So when the Webpack is done here, we see the bundling is done. And now we see one single file that includes both of our libraries together. And we know that by way of the name. So what does that functionally look like in a real world scenario? Well, let's go ahead and jump over to just this quick web part. This is exactly the same web part, very simple. We'll go ahead and refresh. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up the network. And we know that it has vendors in it, right? So I'm just going to filter here to vendors. I'm going to eliminate. Now what happens is I'm going to go ahead and load my bundles when I click this button, and it's going to display the current date so we know it's working. So I click that, we see the current date, and there is our bundle having been imported asynchronously at the time we need it, as opposed to just on demand or on load, even if we don't necessarily need it immediately. So let me go back to our slides. And what are the benefits for us? Improved debugging makes it easier to find out exactly what files we're working with, right? Because instead of seeing those random names, we're able to see custom names that we're then able to key on and identify and know exactly what's going on. Improved telemetry, right? So you can use custom names, you can build reports on that. It helps identify what's being used, etc. And of course, you can use these in library components. As you know, I'm a big fan of library components. Here are some useful links. I'll paste them in the chat window after the tutorial or after the demo, but there's some Microsoft documentation on dynamic loading, a couple of video tutorials, and then we do have a sample in the PnP repo that does show how to do and take advantage of the optimized dynamic bundling, and including those Webpack chunk names are as simple as the small little comment that we saw inserted. All right, well, that's it for my demo, so I appreciate your time, and I'll hand it back over to Patrick.
Great. Thank you, David, for that. And I'm going to hand it over to Ramin with a calling Dynamics 365 APIs from SharePoint. Ramin?
Hello.
Take it away.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Ramin Ahmadi. I'm a SharePoint developer at Content & Code, and you can find my contact information from here. And today, I'm going to show you how you can call Dynamics 365 CRM APIs from SharePoint Framework web part. So let's jump to the demo without wasting time. So the demo itself is really simple. I used AndDesign to build this UI. It's a React library, which has plenty of UI components you can explore from its website. The ones I used is the expandable table you can see here, which returns top 20 accounts from Dynamics CRM, which has a pagination. And by clicking on each rows, you can see the related contacts to each account. And we have a search box at the top that you can search, and it returns data back from Dynamics CRM. So this is the web part. It's really simple. So in terms of the properties, it has 3 properties. One is the CRM instance URL, which we can define here, and the app registration and the Azure function URL, which I'm going to talk about these 2 later on. So let's jump to the code so I can show you some of the cooler stuff behind the scene. So we have two components here. I hope it's large enough and you can see the code. So this is the accounts components, which using and design, as I mentioned, is table, divider, and search components. And by the way, I'm using React hooks. I think we are getting used to this approach, and it's a really a simple way of building components, and it's more readable than the classic way of building components. I have a table here which just displays the accounts, which has an expandable property, which is another component. And if you go to that component, it's just basically another table with 4 columns displaying the contacts information. And when you click or select each row, it just call get contacts from a service class, which is a dynamic service, and brings back the data and display it to the user. But the takeaway from this sample is in the dynamic service class, which I have a AAD token provider factory class here. So AAD token provider factory gives you the get token provider class. Get token provider method. And by calling that, you can get token for a resource. If you remember a few weeks ago, I explained this for building a Yammer part. So in this case, you can get access to another resource. And when you get the token, you can use it to call the API that you can find here. For example, we are getting contacts by filter that is account ID, and also set the authorization header with the token we got from the AAD token provider. And when user try to search, you also get the accounts back from the dynamic CRM by filtering the name. Bear in mind that you need also to add the permissions to the SharePoint Online Client Accessibility, which is dynamic CRM, and it has only one permission available. It is a user impersonation. So this is one way to get the data back or calling dynamic CRM. But recently we had a project that client asked us to develop an Azure function for them instead of using this approach. So as you can see, application permissions are not available here. So how can we pass the delegated permissions from the SharePoint web part to the Azure function and pass it over to Dynamics CRM to get the data back? So the answer is using OS2 on behalf of Flow. That is a diagram for this I just created for you guys. So this flow helps you to authorize access from the gateway, that is Azure function in our sample, to the downstream APIs without losing trace of the user. So we know that the user using our web part has been already authenticated, and also we know that when we use AAD HTTP client to access Azure AD protected APIs like Azure Functions, it attaches a bearer JWT token to the ongoing request. It means that internally, the AAD HTTP client implements the Azure AD OS flow using ADL.js to obtain a valid access token. So here we have the access token to get access to the Azure function. So from here, we need to authenticate to Microsoft Identity Platform token insurance endpoint to request another token to get access to Dynamics 365 CRM. So it validates the credentials along with the Azure function and issues the access token for Dynamics CRM. And after obtaining the access token, we can set it in the authorization header of the request. And finally, when we get the result back, we can pass it over to the SPFx report to display it to the user. So if I want to show you the code, so we know how to use the AAD HTTP client. And in this sample, I use the Azure function as a middle tier web API to call the Dynamics CRM. As you can see here, we are calling that Azure function with a parameter which is instance URL. It is Dynamics CRM instance URL. So it's passing the access token to the Azure function, and it does it behind the scenes, so we don't need to do anything about the access token. And if we go to the Azure function code, first we get the JW token from the authorization header, and also the instance URL, which is our Dynamics CRM URL. We have a function. We have a function here. I'm using Microsoft.client.identity to get the token by building a client application using client ID, client secret, and tenant ID, and also the default scope, which is a built-in scope for every application that refers to the static list of permissions configured on the application registration. As you saw, it only has one permission, but it can be multiple permissions, and it returns all of them. And by calling acquire token on behalf of, we can pass that JW token, which is a user session, and get the access token we need to get access to Dynamics CRM, and then we can set that token to the authorization header, and then we can call the API and if it returns any data back, we can return it to the web part. And the Azure function itself is secured with Azure Active Directory. So this is a secured Azure function. And we also added Dynamics CRM into the permissions for this Azure function, which you need to do that. Otherwise, it's gonna throw you an error for getting access to that resource. So I think I explained everything. So I'm gonna pass it to you guys.
All right.
Ramin, sorry, Patrick. If you don't mind, can you go back still to the UX, just to recap on how it was working and how it behaves? Sorry, Patrick, for jumping there. Just for those.
Yeah. So this sample is a mix of using AAD token provider and also AAD HTTP client. For getting the data, when you first load the page, it's using AAD HTTP client. Which is here, get accounts. But after that, if you start searching, or if you want to get the contacts, is using the AAD HTTP client, AAD token provider.
Cool. Looking really good. Sorry, Patrick, I'm messing your flow. Jumping in. Now that I'm back, I'm messing your flow in this call. Sorry for that. Thanks, Ramin.
Cheers.
Thanks, Ramin. Really great
really
stuff.
Cool stuff, Ramin. Really great stuff. The auth stuff is always interesting to see how that works, because I know it can be tricky at times for sure. Our last demo today is Hugo. Hugo, if you are ready to go, feel free to take over.
I believe I am. I'm going to start talking and assume that you can see my screen. So
I can.
Please scream at me if you don't see it. So my name is Hugo. This is my mugshot, and I can be reached at BernieH on Twitter and TahoeNinjas.blog. I'm an MVP and a proud member of the PnP team. And today I will be talking about a web part that I originally built without SPFx. It was a web part that I created for a college that wanted to allow students to upload their own photo ID. Now, the problem is at that age, those students are not always making the best decisions. That's why we have to put messages like, do not eat laundry detergent. I mean, it's their fault for making the laundry detergent look so delicious, but those people were not necessarily making the best decisions when they were uploading their pictures. And they had a person full-time reviewing photo IDs that people were submitting. So the requirements were, and I like this quote, by the way, by Douglas Adams that says, that basically if you try to design something that's completely foolproof, it's because you underestimate the ingenuity of complete fools. So we tried to do something that was foolproof, but it would require students to be able to upload passport-style pictures. That would be a 1-to-1 ratio, like a square picture. Only one person per picture. And it should be the student's own picture, not their children or pet. And trust me, you wouldn't believe the pictures we got. No avatars, no drawing, no racy images. Yes, we did get racy and adult images. No hats, but religious headwear should be permitted, and no sunglasses. And again, the whole idea was to be able to automatically approve the pictures so that we wouldn't have to have someone just manually reviewing pictures. So those people could spend their time doing useful stuff. So the web part that I'll be showing today is a web part that will automatically review those. And you can see here the requirements are validated and tells you what's wrong. And the idea is to allow students to actually create good pictures, upload pictures that are automatically approved. Like this one here from Visa. I may have overridden the age there, by the way. It was more like 29. So how do we do that? Well, SPFx to the rescue. Let's get to the demo. So the first thing is this web part that you'll be seeing here today is already available for you in the SPFx web part samples repo. You can use it as is, and you'll see it's completely customizable. Let's start with talking about the computer vision services. So with Azure Cognitive Services, you have the ability to actually upload pictures or submit pictures and have them automatically reviewed. So for example, if I look for a picture here and I take, let's say this picture here, if the demo gods are with me, so you'll see that it's automatically identifying information about this picture. And it's identifying keywords like person, man, woman, camera. It's just missing TV, really. So that's great. And we can actually do that by also calling the APIs directly. So if you go to the API, you can actually make post or get request on different things. And it'll document everything you need to do. So you pick a location, and then you specify the features you want to identify. So we want adult, we want categories, we want description, faces, and things like that. And then you can also detect celebrities. And one of the reasons why it detects celebrities is because we used to have jokers that would submit pictures of celebrities pretending that it was them. And then when you submit the picture, you can determine whether it's a URL to a picture, a binary stream, or multiform data, which is what I'll be using. And the response you get looks a little something like this, where you get a JSON structure with, it's never 100%, right? We're using machine learning here, so it's never 100%, but it's definitely a high confidence, 99% confidence that these things are, not racy, for example, and things like that. So what you need to do to get this going is you can go to your Azure and you can create a new AI cognitive service resource in Azure, and it'll create a key and an endpoint for you. I'm not going to share my key with you. But that's the problem, right? So if you have an API key and it's supposed to be secret, you probably don't want to allow your users to, or ask your users when they configure the web part to enter the key. At the same time, you probably don't want to hard code those values in your web part. And this is where there's a really cool feature that I don't think many people know about. It's the SharePoint Online Tenant Properties. And what it allows you to do, it allows you to call a REST API from within your web part to retrieve properties that you want to store centrally at your tenant level. And there are no REST APIs that I know of to set the properties, but you can actually use things like PnP PowerShell or Office 365 to do this. So you would call, with Office 365, you'd call the SPO storage entity, and then you would give it a unique name, a unique value. For example, I use the very original Azure key and Azure endpoint. And then when I call the REST API from within the web part, I get the value. So this is a great way to allow me to deploy web parts that have secret APIs or secret keys or secret values that I don't want people to see. For the purpose of the demo, however, I did customize the web part so that if you don't specify the storage entity, it will automatically show prompt the user to enter this. So let's see. All right, so this is my web part. And as soon as you do this, so you can see here, because I didn't use tenant properties, I have to configure it. So to configure it here, I have to provide, again, my key, which I will copy, and my endpoint. And by the way, if anybody is asking questions, I can't see the chat window. I just want to point out here, this element here is, you'll notice it's actually rich text that I've displayed inside of the property pane. And this is usually not trivial to do, but there's a new PnP reusable property pane control that's currently in beta that allows you to use things like Markdown to actually create text. This is a great way to provide guidance for your users when you want, or help or support information when you want people to do this. And then at the bottom here, I can say I want portrait photos. I don't want to allow clip art, racy images, adult images, and so on and so forth. And I'll come back to the forbidden tags if I have time. So now all I should be able to do here is I should be able to just drag and drop, click, or things like so. If I pick, for example, this picture here, which is a real passport picture, and if I can just kind of crop it. When I click submit, you'll see the gratuitous animation, and then it says, yes, this is a picture, and I'll click update later. Let's try a different picture. So if I use, let's say, this picture here, this is actually not a passport picture. This is not a portrait. This is kind of just a mugshot, right? So let's see. Vesa, I'm sorry, but IT hasn't been kind to you. It says you're 53. Just for fun, let's look at the slightly younger picture here. Again, this should not get approved, but let's see. Oh, it didn't like that. Let's try a different picture here. So if I look at, for example, I take a picture of me before I've had my first coffee in the morning, and I submit that, it should automatically detect that this is a gory picture. Now, I know everybody's looking for me to show an adult picture. I'm not going to show an adult picture. I will, however, show a picture of my future wife. And if I actually take this picture here, which is as racy as I could do in this call, and I submit that, it should automatically detect that this is a racy picture. Now, all the call information that we're getting behind the scene, all the information, I'm in the web part sample, I'm actually outputting the return information in the console. So if you're ever interested to see what kind of analysis we're getting, this is all the information here. So see here, it's actually saying, yes, it is racy content, and there's a lot of information. So if I take a real picture of me instead, just to show, you know, that this thing works, and I just go like this, I submit, it'll actually say, hey, this is not a this is not a portrait. It'll also say, hey, did anyone ever tell you how much you look like Daniel Craig? It's I get that all the time. So I'll just change this to be more like a passport photo, and I can just click and update. Right. So this is the same web part now. I could actually use the camera if I wanted to, and this works on mobile devices as well. Hello, everyone. Smile. Yeah, they say the camera adds 10 pounds, so I'm probably overlaying about 3 cameras. So I'm showing here my profile picture, and I guess I should have showed you when I click on update, my profile picture should always update here. There you go. So we've got a few more minutes, so let me get to the code, show you the code, unless there's a specific picture that anyone wants to see, but let's do this. So the first thing we do is in the web part, we have a storage entity service that I've created, which just gets the API, calls the API that we talked about, and we use both the storage key as the name, so that's the API key, and the API key and the API endpoint. And then I just do a regular HTTP response or request to get the information, and then whatever value is coming from the JSON structure, I'm just looking at the dot value, and I'm returning that back to my entity service. In my analysis services, yes, I'll actually verify multiple people as well. In my analysis services, what I do is I just grab the API key and endpoint, whether it was provided by the tenant storage or by the web part configuration. And then I do some very embarrassing search and replace to remove all the prefix to say that this is an image, so that I can get just a base 64 buffer image that I can pass. And you'll see here that I just passed the API key and the API endpoint to Azure Cognitive Services. And then I just say, as you saw in the API documentation, these are the sets of information I'm looking for. And for some reason, I noticed that I'm passing tags twice. It just ignores that. But I want here, is it adult? Is it, what kind of images, and so on and so forth. Now, the web part has this little bit here at the bottom that shows you whether your web part meets the criteria or not. This is done in an element called analysis dialog content. It is derived from the SPFx dialog, so it allows me to overlay everything on top of the page and block everything else on the page. So what I do here is I just call my web service, or my service, which calls the cognitive services, and then I do some analysis. And this is kind of embarrassing how I do this, but I just go through every single connection, like, let's look at the categories. Is this a valid portrait? Is there only one person? And so on and so forth. And then I use state to actually store the information so that the screen refreshes automatically. And then I'm using some very simple React rendering to render information like, is this valid or not? Now, I created a custom checklist control because I wanted to be able to, I was too lazy to kind of rinse and repeat every time that I wanted to say, is it valid, yes or no? So I just created an analysis checklist component that I use to display the list. And then finally, when I want to update photo, I have two methods in there, one that uses the PnPjs, one that uses the graph. I was honestly having some problems with the PnPjs. If only I knew people on the call that could help me with this. But I just called the graph using the regular graph API method, and I'll show you the page for that. I'm not actually doing so well with handling the error. Right now, I just write that to the console. I should probably put a nice message or not so nice message when there's an error, but you get the point. And then finally, the part that I was telling you, the rich text in the, I have hyperlinks here and bold in the property pane. And if you've used property panes, it's not always easy to do that. So we are using the brand new property pane markdown content control that allows you to pass markdown. And so all I can do here, all I need to do is pass a a localized string resource that contains my markdown. And so in my localized content, I have my cool markdown there. And so you see the hyperlinks and the 2 stars for the bold content. That's the documentation for the property pane markdown content, which is currently in beta. Hopefully it'll be released soon. You can get that to the PnP GitHub.io at the URL below. So what we covered today, and I've got a few more minutes, so I'll actually demo some additional images, but what we covered today is Azure Cognitive Services, using SharePoint Online tenant properties to hide secrets that you don't necessarily want to ask users to configure, using Graph to save profile pictures, and the brand new property pane markdown content control. You can find the code at the URL, and you can reach me at this at my blog and my Twitter account. Let's go back to the cool web part for a second. And so someone asked, can it detect multiple pictures? So this is a poster from a session that David and I are going to be doing at the PnP conference. It should detect 2 faces, hopefully. Oh, it only detected 1. That's embarrassing. Oh yes, I remember, because I gotta do this. No, it didn't work. Oh well. Okay, let me just prove that this works. Let me just show this really picture of awesome, cool-looking people here, and submit. You can see Bert is not too impressed here that he's on the picture, and yes, it detects 4 pictures, and it says you shouldn't do that. And then we had a question to ask a picture of Parker. I don't have a picture of Parker, but
hey, Hugo, let's. This has been a fantastic demo, but we need a couple minutes here to close out the call and do the picture. So awesome demo.
Awesome. Oh, yeah,
very much appreciate it. Thank you. Very great to see that. And the integration with Cognitive Services is really exciting to see. Love seeing that. So thank you to Hugo for the demo there. Let me bounce over to screen number 2. And thank you as well to Ramin and David. So 3 great demos again. Very much appreciate those demos from folks. Take the time. If you would like to do a demo on this call, please do reach out to us. We would love to host you on the call for the demo. We don't really have any time for Q&A today, unfortunately. Recording will be available in about 24 hours on SharePoint Community YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter. Next SPFx call will be in 2 Thursdays on August 27th. The next general dev call is next Thursday on August 20th. And our September monthly community call is September 8th. So I encourage everybody to attend all or any of those that you can. If you can't make it, of course, the recordings will be available. A final reminder for folks that mention things like they're having an issue with PnPjs or any of the other libraries, would love to hear about those issues in the issues list. Please do report those. We'd love to get those fixed for you. A whole host of developer community calls there as well. So covering many, many topics in many, many areas. So great ways to stay informed on what is coming up.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks also
all.
for the presenters. Thanks, Patrick. Have a great weekend. Well, after tomorrow, Friday, but still later. Bye-bye.
Bye. Everybody.